Thanks for staying with us. You're watching WION The World and this is Speed News. Let's start with all the top stories making headlines today. The United States has begun a high-stakes blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. President Donald Trump warned that Iranian attack boats that approached the American naval blockade would be destroyed. Iran has responded by threatening ports across the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Trump later claimed that 34 ships transited the strait, which was the highest number since it had been closed. Ship tracking data from marine traffic showed minimal traffic along the Strait of Hormuz as the blockade kicked in. Meanwhile, Iran's Ministry of Defense warned that foreign military efforts to police the strait would escalate the crisis and instability in global energy security. US Vice President J.D. Vance accuses the Iranian government of engaging in an act of economic terrorism by blocking traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. In a social media post, Trump warned that any Iranian fast attack ships caught trying to approach the blockade will be immediately eliminated. Earlier, Iran's parliament speaker said the country would not surrender under threats. However, there has been no response to Trump's latest remarks. Meanwhile, the UK Maritime Trade Operations has issued an advisory saying ships in the area may encounter a military presence and right of visit procedures during passage. Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem has urged Lebanon to cancel the planned meeting with Israel in Washington. In a televised address, Qassem reiterated Hezbollah's rejection of direct negotiations with who he referred to as the group's foe. The Lebanese and Israeli ambassadors to the US are scheduled to meet in Washington to discuss holding direct negotiations. Qassem called the talks a ploy to pressure Hezbollah into laying down its arms. Lebanese authorities stress Beirut first wants to secure a ceasefire in the Israel-Hezbollah war, but Israel has dismissed that prospect. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he wants a real peace agreement that will last for generations. A day after launching a scathing attack on Pope Leo, US President Donald Trump has refused to apologize for his comments on the pontiff. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump repeated his charge that Pope Leo is weak on crime and is against his policies on Iran. Trump also defended his AI-generated image depicting him as Jesus-like figure. The image was posted on Trump's Truth Social account shortly after his comments on the Pope. When asked about the image, Trump denied that he was trying to look like Jesus Christ. Instead, Trump said it was meant to portray him as a doctor. US President Donald Trump threatened that Cuba would be Washington's next target following attacks on Venezuela and Iran. Days after launching the war with Iran, Trump threatened that Cuba is going to fall pretty soon, but his administration will focus on the ongoing war with Iran right now. Trump also repeated his previous assertions that Cuba is a failing nation. Meanwhile, Cuban President Díaz-Canel says his government will resist mounting US pressure. Cuba has been facing a severe economic and energy crisis since the US military raided Venezuela and took Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by force on January 3rd. US Southern Command said it carried out a lethal strike on a vessel operating along known narco-trafficking routes in the Eastern Pacific as part of Operation Southern Spear. The military said two alleged narco-terrorists were killed in the operation with no US forces harmed. Southcom released video of the said strike on their X page, the second in 2 days. On April 12th, it released videos of similar strikes on vessels it said happened on Saturday. US oil giant Chevron and the government of Venezuela signed 2 deals that will expand oil production in the country, as the country seeks to boost private investment in the sector. The deal sees Chevron increasing its stake in a joint venture it has with the Venezuelan state oil company that extracts oil from the Orinoco oil belt, one of the world's largest oil depots. In return, Chevron will hand over some rights to offshore gas extraction and reduce a stake in other ventures. Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, attended a march in Caracas marking the 24th anniversary of the 2002 coup, which saw the late President Hugo Chavez ousted from office for 47 hours before being restored to power. The short-lived coup is an event the government commemorates as National Dignity Day and Bolivarian Militia Day, and supporters were seen carrying portraits and effigies of Chavez through the streets of the capital city. Rodriguez, who appeared on stage alongside Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello, called on Venezuelans to unite and demanded an end to international sanctions. She called for tighter civic-military police unity and vowed there was no place for extremism in Venezuela. Peru's leftist presidential candidate Roberto Sanchez expressed confidence that he would secure a spot in a runoff election. Sanchez said that vote tallies from his representatives across the country confirmed a strong showing, particularly in rural areas, the Southern Highlands and the Amazon region. During the interview, Together for Peru Party's candidate said his government would not expropriate assets from any sector. A poll published shows right-leaning candidate Keiko Fujimori is leading Peru's presidential vote with 17.1% if no candidate clears the 50% threshold needed to win outright. The 2 most voted candidates would advance to a second round, scheduled for June 7th. North Korea conducted another test fire of strategic cruise missiles and anti-warship missiles as part of operational efficiency trials of its destroyer Chohyun, a North Korean warship. In images aired by state media KRT, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was seen observing the test alongside senior defense officials and naval commanders following an inspection of the destroyer. 2 strategic cruise missiles and 3 anti-warship missiles were fired to check the warship's integrated weapons command system, train crews in missile launch procedures, and verify the accuracy and anti-jamming performance of upgraded navigation systems. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and elderly Holocaust survivors took part in a ceremony marking the country's Holocaust Remembrance Day in Jerusalem. The ceremony was aired as the country began the State Memorial Day for the 6 million Jews killed by the Nazis during World War II. This morning, a 2-minute-long siren will blare across the country and Israelis will stand still in commemoration. In his pre-recorded speech for the ceremony, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he had promised to not allow Iran to be a nuclear state and to not allow a second Holocaust. A U.S. judge dismissed Donald Trump's defamation lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal over an article asserting the U.S. president's name was on a 2003 birthday greeting for the late financier and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, but said Trump could refile the case. Miami-based U.S. District Judge Darren Gale said Trump did not meet the actual malice standard that public figures must clear in defamation. The judge wrote that the journal's reporters reached out to Trump for comment beforehand and printed his denial. Hale said Trump could file an amended version of the lawsuit by April 27th. The latest elections in Hungary saw Viktor Orban ousted from 16 years in power. Meanwhile, Hungarian opposition leader Peter Magyar accused outgoing Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó of shredding documents at the Foreign Ministry. Magyar, whose party won a landslide election victory, claimed Szijjártó appeared at the ministry building where he and colleagues were destroying official papers.
Úgy lehet ellenállni, hogyha a nemzeti kormány az önök számára, mint hogy április 12-én a nemzeti kormány.
Dutch King Willem Alexander and Queen Maxima arrived for a dinner hosted by US President Donald Trump at the White House. Trump and First Lady Melania Trump greeted the couple upon their arrival. This comes ahead of King Charles and Queen Camilla's visit later this month.
Mr. President,
a railway through Angola's Lobito corridor, a vital source of critical minerals like copper and cobalt, was forced to suspend operations after nearby rivers burst their banks, causing flooding. The Lobito Atlantic Railway said heavy rains flooded bridges over the Halo River between Cubal and Caimbabo stations, as well as a bridge over the nearby river. Floodwater still flowed as homes were underwater, food and possessions washed away, and railway lines damaged. Climate change is worsening floods across the southern Africa region, frequently disrupting transport. India is likely to see below-average monsoon rains for the first time in 3 years in 2026, raising concerns over farm output and growth in Asia's third-largest economy as it battles inflation driven by the Iran war. The monsoon is the lifeblood of India's nearly $4 trillion economy, delivering almost 70% of the rainfall needed to water farms and replenish aquifers and reservoirs. The monsoon, which typically arrives over the southern state of Kerala around June 1st and retreats by mid-September, is expected to reach 92% of the long-period average this year. A Texas man was charged of attempted murder by allegedly hurling a Molotov cocktail at the home of OpenAI CEO Sam Altman and attempting to set fire to the AI firm's headquarters. 20-year-old Daniel Moreno-Gama was captured on surveillance video throwing an incendiary device outside Altman's San Francisco residence. Moreno-Gama was believed to carry a self-authored anti-AI document when the San Francisco Police Department arrested him. According to the FBI, the document Moreno-Gama wrote, which was cited as evidence of motive-contained threats directed at Altman. OpenAI faces growing scrutiny for its role in national security, including criticism of a proposed deal with the US government to allow its technology to be used in classified military operations. Tesla's full self-driving software may soon expand across Europe after Dutch regulator RTW moved to seek EU-wide approval. The system developed by Tesla can steer, brake and accelerate, but still requires driver supervision and is not fully autonomous. The software has already been approved in the Netherlands, making it the first country in Europe to clear the technology. The Dutch authority has now informed the European Commission and will present its case for wider approval in the month of May. If approved, the system could be rolled out across Europe, subject to support from member states. Uber is set to face a second federal jury trial in the United States over sexual assault allegations by a passenger. The case in North Carolina involves a woman who claims a driver assaulted her during a ride in 2019. The trial is seen as a key test case amid more than 3,300 similar lawsuits against the company. It follows an earlier verdict in Arizona where a jury awarded $8.5 million to a plaintiff. Uber urges and argues it is a technology platform and not directly liable for actions of drivers who it calls independent contractors. Shiny Hunters has allegedly stolen data from multiple companies after a breach at Anodot, which helps companies track outages and performance issues. The hackers are now threatening to release the data online unless ransom demands are met. According to Bleeping Computer, the attack compromised authentication tokens used by customers to access cloud data. Using these tokens, hackers were able to access and steal large amounts of sensitive information. The breach was detected after data connectors stopped working, disrupting customer access. Asian stocks climbed and global markets turned positive as hopes for renewed US-Iran talks lifted investor sentiment. MSCI's, the broadest index for Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan, was up 1% in early Asia trade, while Japan's Nikkei and South Korea's Kospi rose more than 2% each. Nasdaq futures advanced 0.13%, while S&P 500 futures held steady, following an overnight rally on Wall Street, while Euro Stoxx 50 futures gained 0.63% and DAX futures added 0.77%. Analysts say markets are reacting to optimism around diplomacy rather than a concrete deal. However, uncertainty remains high, with investors still cautious about the broader economic outlook and potential inflation pressures. Oil prices declined in early Asian trade as renewed hopes of US-Iran dialogue eased fears of supply disruptions from the Strait of Hormuz blockade. Brent and US crude both fell after previous gains as signs of continued negotiations helped calm markets. Despite ongoing tensions and threats from Iran, analysts say expectations of a potential deal and softening price pressures. However, supply risks remain, with millions of barrels still impacted by the blockade. Gold prices inched up after recent losses as renewed hopes of US-Iran talks eased inflation concerns. Bullion recovered slightly even as the US moved ahead with the Strait of Hormuz blockade. Signals from both Washington and Tehran about willingness to negotiate helped support prices, with markets cautiously watching for progress on a potential deal. The dollar held steady as investors balanced rising supply risks from US blockade of Iranian ships against ongoing hopes for renewed diplomacy with Tehran. Currency markets showed a limited movement, with the euro, yen and pound posting modest gains. Analysts say continued dialogue is helping stabilize sentiment despite geopolitical tensions. However, uncertainty around the ceasefire and global outlook keeps market cautious, with potential volatility ahead.